Hello. If you had the chance, would you change the world? Well, of course you would. Of course you would, because I didn't say save the world. I said change the world, improve it, make it nicer than we find it already. And we all want to do that. We all constantly think about ways to do that. And I'm here to tell you, happy news, that we can, and we do, and we will. But sadly, too many of us tend to think that changing the world would be awfully hard work, and we're very busy, if not impossible, and probably a bit dreary, and so we leave it for someone else. And that's a real shame, and part of the reason why we do that is because of the way we were taught history at school. The great English historian Lord Macaulay said, "History is but the biography of great men." And if you don't think of yourself as a great man, that's a bit demoralizing. It means it's for somebody else, not for you. Well, happily, the so-called great man theory of history has been on its way out for some time. And one of the people who gave it a good shove was the Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy. And he said that actually history is the sum total as an infinitesimally large number of infinitely small actions that we all take every day, at all times of every day. And that's very easy to see if you think about something like an election. Do you vote for this party, or kind of register your disapproval by not voting for anybody at all? And we can all see that whatever you do, the final outcome is very much dependent on what we all do. But actually, everything that we do all the time matters, because you're either doing this or you're doing that. And so it's really healthy, and it's actually a good feeling to take responsibility for that. It sounds like it might not be a good feeling to take responsibility. It's the sort of thing that teachers tell us off for and say, take responsibility, but I'll come back to this in a moment. So we're all making history all of the time. And for the poor people who don't recognize that, they tend to be the people who talk about the system or the status quo, as if it's got nothing to do with them. So they'll say, oh, I want to do a street party, but I can't because the rules won't allow me. And they don't recognize that they do actually have a choice. They could ignore the rules, or they could get the rules changed, but they do have a choice. So when you think about the status quo in that way, it's very easy to see why you would think of it in that way. It's an abstract term, and it sounds a bit sort of chunky and not very easy to humanize. So I'm going to give you an alternative way to think about the status quo, or the system. And I'd suggest that you think about a powerful king on the stage. You can shut your eyes if you like. What does a powerful king on the stage look like? It's nothing to do with the large crown or the huge burnished gold throne. Those only tell you that he's the king. What makes him powerful? The thing that makes him powerful are the other people on stage who are flat on their faces before him. So if the other actors got up and turned their backs on him and smoked a cigarette or told some jokes or had a snooze, the same powerful king wouldn't be powerful at all without doing anything differently. So all his power comes from them. It comes from us. And if you think about the status quo in that way, you can see that you too can get up off your face if you don't like it and do something better. What? What will you do? Well, I'm not here to tell you what I think you should do. It's about what you should do and working it out for yourself. But I'm going to tell you that broadly, there are three different types of action that we can take once we've deliberately decided we want to make some change. The first type of action is to highlight an issue that's very important to us. The second one is to, if you like, withdraw our consent from something that we disapprove of. And the third one is just to set up a better alternative. And they're all perfectly good approaches, and sometimes you need to combine them. I'm going to talk about the first one here. This is highlighting an issue. The people on the left are very well known in Germany now. They're great heroes. They're called the White Rose Group. And they were part-time students and soldiers in Munich. And they hated what the Nazis were doing, and they wanted to publicize it to other Germans. And so they took a great risk of installing a printing machine in one of their cellars, and they wrote letters explaining what was going on, and they sent the letters to households that they chose at random from the phone book. And they did even more than that. I mean, it's very dangerous even to do that, but they traveled around the country with suitcases stuffed full of these letters, and so that they could send them from Stuttgart to Dresden, and then from Cologne to Hamburg, wherever it is. So they gave the impression that they were a great nationwide network. It was really just Sophie Scholl and her brother and a couple of his mates. And they did really well. We don't have to take such a bold step as them. These days we can all just publicise issues on Facebook or by Twitter, and I'm sure many of the people in this room will have done so already, probably with great effect. The next of the categories of action that I want to talk about is withdrawing your consent. So you have here the original person who got up off his face in front of the king, Moses on the left, waiting for the Red Sea to part in Lego. And there's Moses, and those are the Israelites. And the Israelites didn't like the way that Pharaoh was carrying on. So they decided to get out of there. And so that's one way you can do this. Another person is the woman sitting down in that picture, which is reenacted. That's Rosa Parks. And she started the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, because one day she felt too tired to get up and give her seat to a white person. It's quite interesting that a whole campaign started because someone was too tired. You don't have to be full of energetic sort of vim and so on to get things started. So Rosa Parks just started the whole thing off. She was the first spark, but she didn't lead it. So you don't need to worry about, taking the first step means I'll have to be in charge forever afterwards. You don't. You can just do the first step and it will inspire other people. And what I think is also very interesting about the bus boycott is that it started off with very modest ambitions. People forget this now, but originally all the people in Montgomery, Alabama wanted to do, all the black people who boycotted the bus system, all they wanted was a new arrangement about where they could sit and when. It was very simple. But gradually they became more ambitious as they became more successful, so that by the end of little over a year, they were calling for desegregation across the whole of America, a previously unthinkable target. So it's amazing what you can do once you get started. It accumulates its own momentum. The next category is building an alternative to what you don't think is acceptable at the moment. So you have here on the left Charles de Gaulle setting up his French government in exile during the Second World War because he didn't like the one that was in Vichy France. But I want to concentrate a little more on my friend Richard Reynolds in the other picture. Richard lives in a tower block in Elephant and Castle, which is not the most attractive part of London, and he doesn't have a garden. And so he started planting flowers and other plants in municipal traffic islands and so on, and just making them look nice. And some of his friends would join in, and people who just walked past would join in. And sometimes officials said, oh, you're not allowed to do that. But they did it anyway, and they carried on. And Richard became kind of the leader of the worldwide guerrilla gardening movement. And he became, by just doing these tiny little things, he became an inspirational example to really hundreds of thousands of people all over the world. So that's really a wonderful thing that somebody could do. But what are you going to do? It's going to vary for all of us. But what's really odd is that many of us feel like we're impaled on a kind of a paradox. We really desperately want to do something, but we haven't the faintest idea what it's going to be. So we have to kind of work that out. And one of the ways to work it out is to think about the things that we actually enjoy. Now, Alain has gone into this subject, I think, extensively enough, so I'm going to talk about something else. But I want to talk about an experiment that the positive psychologists did fairly recently. They did a study to consider what it is that gives people pleasure. And they sent out one group to try hedonism, basically to eat lots of chocolate and have a foot massage, that kind of thing. And the other group was sent out to do something meaningful. And it was left up to them to decide what the meaningful thing was. But they went out and did it. And they came back, and the results all came in. And it seemed pretty clear that the people who'd done something meaningful felt a longer, deeper, longer-lasting satisfaction from it. So changing the world, is better than having a foot massage while you're eating chocolate. So that's good. But what actually do we do? One of the things we want to do is think about what does something meaningful mean for us individually. So I can give you one example. It's maybe not the best in the whole universe, but let's imagine you take your neighbour's dog for a walk. You do it either resentfully because someone told you to, or you do it because you really want to help. And the second version will make you feel good. So you're taking responsibility for your actions. So that's great. So you need to think about the things that you've done in the past that have made a difference, that made you feel good, and that will help you come to some ideas. Also, what are the things that you have dreamed of doing in the past? But one way to get right to the heart of the matter is to ask yourself this question. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? If you ask the question in that way, you'll identify something you really care about, not something you're not really that bothered about. So you could sort of resolve to pick up a little bit more litter every so often, but you're not going to be passionate about it, not in the same way as Bob Geldof was when he wanted to feed the world. So you need to decide what is the thing that's a magnificent ideal for you to drive at, and to try to aim for that instead. But once you've identified that magnificent ideal, there is every chance that you'll be rather daunted by it. You'll freak out a little bit. And you'll think about it as a kind of an icon or a beautiful painting that you can just imagine it. It's a beautiful painting, beautifully framed, and you know just where it's going to go on the wall in the hallway, but nobody's painting it, so it's not going to happen. And so you need to move away from that. What you're doing there is using static thinking. You need to move to some other kind of thinking. And one of the people who can help with this is Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, not every end is a goal. The end of a melody is not a goal. And another way to think of that is to think that you don't go to a concert and say, I wish this music would finish, and then I could really enjoy it. Yeah. You enjoy it as it's going along. You make sure that every moment is worthwhile in its own right. And you enjoy each step. And when you do that, you're doing process thinking, like these people. Moving away from static thinking to process thinking. And when you enshrine every little moment, you make everything worthwhile in its own right. You recognize that everything that's ever been achieved by humankind, all the great things we've ever achieved, have always been done in small steps, one after the other. You know, Neil Armstrong didn't wake up one morning and go to the moon. A lot of work went into it by lots of different people. So we need to recognize those small steps and learn to really appreciate them. And they also give us great courage to move on to the next thing. So if you think about what I told you about Rosa Parks, they started with a very modest ambition. They got through those small steps, and then they thought, yeah, get rid of desegregation everywhere. So we can build on each of those mini victories and end up with something much greater afterwards. And one way to make yourself focus on the small steps is to ask yourself precisely, what can you do in the next 24 hours? I mean, really, if you can't do anything in that period, what makes you think you will ever start? It's very important to think of that. And the other thing to do, once you've identified your great dream, your great goal, and you've started to think about what you can do in the next 24 hours, and then the 24 hours after that, and so on, is to think about your allies, because you will almost certainly need allies if you're going to do something spectacular. And one of the ways that we can think about our allies is to think about the network that we already have. And I've drawn up a fake example here. You can write your name in the middle of the sheet of paper, and around your name, write the names of the people who give you support. And then draw arrows from them to you, and make the arrows really thick if they give you a lot of support, and rather more faint if they're not so supportive. And then, if you like, you can add the names of people to whom you give support. So I added William at the end, and I put a big, thick arrow there. And you can look at this map afterwards. It's very strange if you've never done it before. It's a rather chilly, strange thing to do with your friends' network. But if you look at this map, you can see that I'm giving an awful lot to William, and he's giving me nothing back. What should I do about that? I mean, I could drop him. Maybe I should. I don't know. But the people who use these maps to help people like alcoholics and addicts who've got very dysfunctional support networks, they will argue that the most practical and helpful supportive relationships are the ones that are reciprocal. So here, for example, Sonia and Ben and Michael. So you may want to do that. But there will be other people who can give you support. The first thing to do is to note that when you've identified the people you want to work with, you must go and ask them for help. That seems very un-British. We think, they're not going to like that. But actually, people like to be asked for help. It's flattering. The only time people don't want to be asked for help is when they feel there is no way to say no. So you need to go to your friends and say, hey, I've got this brilliant idea, and can you please help me with it? But if you don't want to, either now or at any time in the future, no problem, no hard feelings. And you have to mean it. You say it and you mean it. And the great thing about asking them is then you liberate them to make your mission their own. They become active helpers. So they'll phone you out of the blue and they'll say, hey, you know that thing you're doing? I read something in the paper about it. Have you thought about this? So it will become much more dynamic and very useful. But not all of your help will be in your present network. There will be other people. There will be campaign groups, for example. There may be individual enthusiasts dotted around the country and around the world with whom you can join up online. There are lots of those sorts of things. But I want to end by talking about my own experience, because I've said that anyone can change the world, and it would seem a little bit dishonest if I didn't try to say something. I don't offer it as anything outstanding. It just happens to be my experience. And I think it touches on some of the things that we've already heard about. A few years ago, I got very worried about climate change, very worried about resource shortages. And I thought, oh shit, we've got to change the whole world, and everyone's got to grow their own food. And I got really freaked out about it. But I thought, how do I do that without making everybody really worried about the same sort of things as I was doing? And did I really want to freak everybody out? And the first thing I did was join all the obvious campaign groups. And then I set up a group in Transition Belsize, a group of people in Belsize Park, where we got everyone along, all the church groups, all the local councillors, all the Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace, and it was really great. We had this wonderful warm meeting where everyone was coming together, and we all thought, wow, we all care about this, it's going to be great. And we did lots of good things, and we got lots more people involved, and that was very interesting. But we then decided that we were sort of starting to see all the same faces again. And around about that time, I wanted everybody to be growing food, not just a small number of self-selecting people who are in Greenpeace. And so I kind of thought, what do I do next? And I then happened to read a book by Alistair McIntosh, the Scottish campaigner, who said it's no good being a campaigner if you're not a good neighbour. And that really stuck in my mind. And I thought, what does he mean by that? And I thought I'd better give it a try. And so I did. I kind of resigned from the Transition Town group, and I decided to work on my own street. And I had an allotment already, and I filled a sack with apples, and I walked up the street, having first taken the deliberate step of holding my lovely daughter's hand. She's a toddler. And it was a calculated risk. I reckoned that people wouldn't find the sight of a man with a toddler offering free apples too scary. And it was right. I was right. People opened their doors, they took some apples, and it was nice, and I got to meet some of my neighbours who I didn't know already. I met others who I'd known already. And then 6 months later, this was the sneaky bit, but I hope you'll forgive me because it came from the heart. I deliberately grew too many tomato seedlings. And I grabbed Nancy's hand again, I put them in a box, and I walked up the road, and we knocked on the doors. I said, oh dear, I've got too many tomato seedlings. Would you take one? And so, of course, they took one. Who's not going to take one? And I know for a fact that year, lots of people in my street started growing food who had not done so previously. Now, maybe they would have done it anyway. Everybody's doing it now. It's all on telly and so on. But I think I gave them a shove. And I really enjoyed that. And the really important lesson I got from that, actually, I've got a reenactment drawn by Nancy. So that's what it looked like. But I think the really important lesson I learned from that was to try to make it positive, emphasize the positive, because I could have freaked them out about why we're all going to hell in a handcart, but I didn't. I just gave them something very easy and fun to do, which was grow a tomato plant. And that was the solution. So as the late philosopher Raymond Williams once said, the key is not to make despair convincing, it's to make hope possible. And so you're all on a journey, and it starts now, and you might as well make it fun. Thank you.